I think we're gonna make a start now. Thanks. I'm Jo Andrew, Director of Housing and Regeneration at Enfield, and I'm co-chair of the London Housing Directors Group. Welcome everyone to this really useful, topical, and some might say exciting event. We're very pleased to have David Lewis and Vicky Holland from London and Quadrant with us to talk about their journey on dealing with damp and mould. And I know they've got lots to talk about since they launched their Healthy Homes programme in April 2020, so some time now. So I'm sure we're going to have some really good insights and benefit from the journey that L&Q have been on. Just very briefly, by way of context, obviously in London we have some significant challenges, and especially so in our council housing arena. The Ombudsman in 2021 found that 57% of all damp and mould cases across the country were located, maladministration cases, I should say, were reported in London. And that's in stark contrast to the sort of proportion of stock that we have. So we have just under 20% of stock in London across the country. So a kind of high proportion of maladministration cases arising from damp and mould. And we obviously really appreciate how important addressing this issue is to health and the quality of life of our residents. So really it's on the top of our agenda at London Housing Directors. We know though that the challenges we face with an ageing stock portfolio, quite a large flatted amount of accommodation, high density and overcrowded accommodation does not help in addressing damp and mould. And alongside that, we have had and continue to work under an extremely pressurised financial context. We know that since the lifting of the debt cap, we've had more recently caps on rental income, and prior to the lifting of the debt cap, we obviously had the rent reduction. And in London, we have exposure to sort of hyperinflation, should we say, on our cost base, challenges with securing the skills we need and the workforce we need in order to tackle our agendas. So all of that means that it's very important to us in London, but it's also a challenging environment. So really pleased to hear from David and Vicky about how they've progressed at L&Q. And I know that David has significant local authority experience as well, so understands the challenges that we face. So welcome and hand over to David. I would just say David's going to talk for 25 minutes or so, and then there will be the opportunity to ask questions, which I really encourage. So please raise your hand when we get to that point, or no comments, questions in the chat. But I'll hand over to David now.
Thank you, Joanne, and thank you for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm just going to share my slides. So let me just do that up to make sure you can see what I'm talking about. So hope you can see the slides.
It's perfect.
Wonderful. Okay, so just some introduction, just to say a bit more, Joanne just said. So I'm Executive Group Director at L&Q. I've been at L&Q for 2.5 years. I've been Executive Group Director for Property Services since the beginning of March. So it is still quite a new role, but of course I do know L&Q well. I've worked in 4 London local authorities: Lewisham, Southwark, Haringey and Westminster, and they've all been great. And if you're from any of those local authorities on the call, I'm sure I saw Keith Kiernan. There's one hello from me. Right, so just what I'm going to go through, just a bit about L&Q, our damp and mould approach pre-April 2020, a bit about what we've been doing since. Fairly new for about the last 12 to 18 months ago. We've been using artificial intelligence for damp and mould, but also for other areas too, but I'm just going to talk about damp and mould from this call. Some of the challenges and some of the things that we are going on to do that we can see in the road ahead. So just a bit about L&Q. You'll know some of the numbers: 107,000 properties. We are a London-centric housing association, but of course, with the merger with Trafford Housing Trust, which is in Manchester, fully integrated, so we refer to it as the Northwest region. That's our patch, but we are overwhelmingly London and Southeast housing, as you can see, 250,000 people. In terms of how our stock breaks down, you can see that gradual growth since 2018, and you can see 65,000, over 65,000 of our stock general needs. And of course, that's where the concentration of our activity in terms of dealing with damp and mould takes place. Of that 65,000, that's 63% or so are flats. If you look at all stock, 26% is pre-1945, 43% between 1945 and 1999. And of course, as a volume house builder, 31% of our stock is around, that was less than 20 years old. So we've got lots of new build, but interestingly, in what we would define as new build, some of that stock still sees quite significant scales of damp and mould. Shared ownership, just under 13,000, and leaseholders just over 12,000, of course, as you would expect, kind of mixture of tenures. Our stock by London boroughs, so 57,000 properties across London, just for information. But actually, what you also be interested in is the distribution of live damp and mold cases, which you can see on this slide. So this is as of the 31st of March. There were 1,200, just under, I think, 1,200 cases here. Now, many of you would have been supplied the data in around December, January, when you were asking for damp and mold cases in your local authority area. These, of course, are dynamic numbers, and this is the position as of the end of March. In total at the moment, live cases, we've got about 1,800, but I will be saying a bit more about that later. So our approach before 2020, so before April 2020, a fairly familiar approach in lots of organisations that I've worked for. It's very similar to what we were doing here at L&Q. Effectively, that first response was to send a mould kit for the resident to intervene and deal with the mould themselves. What would then happen is it would we may then send an operative, but actually when we charted the resident contact, it will be a second report. We may send another mould kit, and on the third report, we may well send an operative at that point. Now, it was fairly common, certainly in our voids, to find unused mould kits in properties, and the second most common thing in voids was unused tins of paint that had been issued as part of the DEX voucher process. So what we recognised then is that our response was wholly unsatisfactory. We're getting lots of feedback from residents who were saying, well, actually, I've got mould and damp. You send a mould kit, you occasionally send an operative, and matter doesn't get dealt with. We saw that in complaints. We saw that through our transactional surveys, and we needed to do something different. So we did. So since April 2020, what we've been doing, and we partnered with a company called Zap Carbon. Now, some of you may well have heard of Zap Carbon. Actually, their background is in energy efficiency and working towards net zero, advising residents and on the actions that residents need to take to reduce carbon emissions, to address things like moderating heating, but crucially, they were expert on mould and damp and ventilation. So we saw some obvious synergies between the work that they did and what we needed, that kind of holistic approach to dealing with mould and damp. That's why we were so attracted to Zap Carbon. So from April 2020, the Healthy Homes approach was developed, and it's now in its fourth year. For L&Q, there was initially a staff team of 2 staff, and now that's increased to 10, almost 2 years ago. And again, what we liked about working with Zap Carbon, that I know the Ombudsman talks about it's not about lifestyle, but we talk in terms of it being a partnership with residents. So we've got responsibility to make sure the home is secure, safe, warm, repairs are dealt with, but of course residents have got responsibilities too to make sure that the heating is on, that they ventilate, and so forth. So we talk in terms of a partnership, and in fact you'll see from some things that I'm going to go on to show you the extent of the partnership, the extent of the relationship that we agree with residents. So what does the Healthy Homes work involve? So it involves Zap Carbon visiting. So they carry out an inspection. They give advice on mould prevention. They produce a Healthy Homes performance certificate. They clean and shield the mould, which again is very popular with residents, but this is done with special chemicals that a professional from Zap Carbon applies, which gives that immediate mitigation that actually something is being done, whilst they organise the repairs to be undertaken. And they give a detailed report to us which identifies the problem and then of course points us to the issues that they believe are sitting behind the mould and damp. It may not be a repair, it often is. Sometimes it's other issues. Since April 2020 to the end of March, we've carried out nearly 20,000 visits. Again, something that we were very keen to see, and I know there are lots of products on the market, and we did consider lots of humidity sensors that are on the market. I'm sure some of you will have them in your stock too. What we wanted was a bespoke sensor that would fully meet our needs. So Zap Carbon developed one for us. We've now got more than 11,000 sensors fitted across our stock, about £114 inclusive of VAT. So it's not cheap, but certainly competitive in terms of what's available on the market. Now, these sensors, you would expect, track humidity, internal temperatures. They take reading every hour, and then that data goes to the cloud. The information where the temperature, for instance, falls to a level that would lead to mold growth, alerts the resident by text. If we don't get response to that, Zap Carbon telephone the resident, and indeed then we arrange a follow-up visit. So the sensors have been brilliant in terms of a tool to understand what's going on inside residents' homes. Our issue, however, has been we've done nearly 20,000 visits, we've got over 11,000 sensors. The issue is that some residents have declined to have a sensor fitted because of privacy reasons. Despite the fact that we explain what it will do and the benefit, we do have a cohort of residents that have been reluctant to have a sensor fitted. But it's been great. It helps us to understand what's going on, but also it gives us an insight into how the property, how the building is performing. And if it's an issue about building performance, so there's an underlying issue that needs to be addressed, single glazed windows that need to be upgraded to double glazed, an issue with the roof, the sensor will pick up those temperature changes and allows us to investigate, and then that can feed into our investment program, and indeed it does. So this idea of partnership that I referred to earlier, this is a Healthy Homes leaflet that the Zap Carbon assessors visit residents with, and it's really, really insightful in terms of pointing residents to the things that they can do. As you can see, it says things about ventilation, heating, correctly adjusting the thermostat so the heating is optimal. Sensitive things like decluttering, where there, for instance, are clothes on the radiators or there are issues around airflow. When I went out with the Zap Carbon Healthy Homes Assessors in January, the visit took an hour and a half to both diagnose the issue, but actually more of the time was spent with the resident, taking through the issues that were found. And one of the properties we went to, for instance, because of the energy crisis, turned off their heating fully. And then when they were cold in the flat, they turned it up to 30 degrees. And then when the property got hot, which took a very long time, they turned it off again. Again, what the Healthy Homes Assessor was able to do is take them through to actually optimally temperature between 18 and 22. It's a combi boiler, about 6 years old, is much more efficient, but actually more cost effective for the resident too. At the end of the visit, the resident signs the Healthy Homes leaflet to confirm they understood everything. And of course, there's more information provided if they need follow up or have any questions. So really, really effective tool and really well received by residents. Simple flow chart here of how the process worked, but what I particularly like is the report on the right, which and often the reports can be 10, 15 pages long, depending on the issues that they find, identifying, as I've said, the issues that are driving the damp and mould, some recommendations about the work that is required and the work that they have done. From report, so resident contacts our contact centre, generally speaking, Zap Carbon arrive on site in 10 days. 10 days, 10 working days to do the assessment, spend an hour and a half, 2 hours going through the advice, writing up the report and so forth. So within 10 days, and then they pass a more detailed report to us on the repairs. And of course, they fit the sensor if the resident agrees, which the majority do, but there's still a significant cohort that don't accept. In terms of cost, because of course it's all sounds really good, but the typical cost is £430 per visit. So that includes all of the things that I referred to, the clean and shield. And of course, depending on the extent of the clean and shield required, that will drive the cost, the advice, the Healthy Homes leaflet. That will cost £430. And to date, we've spent just over 8.5 million. We also have a ring fence budget that is ring fenced from the repairs budget, about £3 million on repairs associated with the Zap Carbon visit. Now, these are significant sums, of course they are, but again, if we look back at what we were doing pre-April 2020, actually the DIY approach and then these multiple visits that would take place by operatives and surveyors with a really inconsistent approach being used, the cost will be significantly greater than £430. And we will be spending a lot more on the repairs related with the visits. We just simply didn't see it in a joined up way as we do now. The chart on the right shows this continuing increase in damp and mould cases this year, with two significant spikes last year, one in September, then a significant spike in January, which again, many of you would experience that because of the publicity around the tragic Rochdale case, and then of course the absolute focus on damp and mould. For us, though, we saw the spike in those 2 months, but in others it was fairly consistent. I think overall for us it went up by about 26% last year. 1,800 live cases, as I said at the beginning. In terms of repairs, and again, I'm sure you'll see similar trends. The most common repair identified by Zap Carbon is electricals, extractor fans. And in fact, again, in some of the visits that I went to, again, because of the energy crisis, the extractor fans in kitchens and bathrooms were were disconnected. There's a couple of properties they didn't exist, so we arranged for them to be fitted. But certainly extractor fans can come through as the most common area that is reported, followed by roofing, and then a collection of other matters, including plumbing and leaks that you would expect to see. But it's interesting that electrical and roofing is our most common area of problems that are identified by Zap Carbon over the last 3 years. In terms of reporting, again, fairly new for us, is reporting damp and mould data through our monthly health and safety performance monitoring reporting report. It's a mouthful. Document, which clearly it captures the big six, but if you like, we're regarding damp and mould as the seventh area of compliance. So our report goes through to, of course, our senior leadership team, our exec team, and group board. So through the spine of L&Q, everyone understands our performance on damp and mould and has the ability to scrutinise it. We have, before we started reporting, issues around making sure we have that single version of the truth, where damp and mould goes through as Zap Carbon, really clear. But of course, some damp and mould has the ability to be raised first as a repair if it's leak related. And it's just a case of joining the dots up for that. So there's been training for our call centre staff, the main routine for repairs, housing management teams, and our websites all updated, signposting residents to our Healthy Homes programme. But our reporting in particular has been really well received because the business understands how we're doing, but crucially understands if there are problems and delays. So we found it really helpful reporting through our PMR process. AI, so talking about artificial intelligence, just very briefly, because of course this isn't my area of expertise. We do have data scientists that lead on AI. So they use what's called a multi-tree models of decisions that look at consequences, impacts, and so forth. They look at the repairs data over 3 years, at least 3 years, a minimum of 3 years. And from that, they're able to predict where damp and mould will arise. It's fantastic. And as I come on to slide 22, I'll show you the checklist that they've come up with. Let me show you the next slide. So what it does, using the AI tool, using the AI model, it identifies properties that effectively have a 77% accuracy rate of there being damp and mould. So identify properties with a 70% accuracy rate that are likely to have damp and mould. It's not 100%, but I don't think any AI tool is. It's getting better. When they first started, about 70%, going up 70%, 77%. I expect it to go over 80%. And what that does, it points us in the direction of where we need to invest as a intervention to stop damp and mould occurring. And we've identified 10,000 properties that have a high risk of having damp and mould. And I'm going to show you a checklist in a moment that they've developed that they use as part of the model to determine where damp and mould is likely to be. So those 10,000 properties effectively be programmed into our major works investment program so we can target them. But also we do things like property MOTs, so we are able to go in, and if there are properties we can, smaller scale works, we can also visit those and again do the proactive work to kind of move to the front foot away from reacting and being on the back foot. But I've effectively developed a checklist, and this is the 10 factors that feed into that come out the AI model that tell us where damp and mould is likely to occur. And if the answer is positive to any of the 10, the more that are positive, it means positive being the answer being yes, it means that the likelihood of damp and mould is increased. And as you can see, from leak issues, have identified 3 local authorities where the type of stock, and have clearly in all 3 of these local authority areas, we've got quite a high number of stock. That's the type of stock that is there. It's likely this issue about rainfall, low temperatures, ground floor, top floor, expect the nature of the tenants that are there, the level of occupancy, vulnerability, ASB complaints and so forth. So you take all of these together, it points to, so the more, if any property that has all 10, that it's very, very likely that there will be damp and mould. And again, that, as I said, is how they arrived at the 10,000 properties that we need to invest in. And certainly, if it's a vulnerability, support residents. So some of the challenges. Let's move into challenges. And again, I don't think these challenges are unique to L&Q. I think they apply to us all. But the first one that I'll call out is about supply chain. Because certainly in the early years, and certainly for the first 12 months to 18 months, because of course, this is pandemic time. And as we came out of the pandemic, one of the biggest issues, Zap Carbon were able to attend within 10 days, provide a report really quickly. And then, of course, it was about dealing with the repairs that they identified. We had some real challenges dealing with the repairs in the early period of this relationship. So we've got an in-house DLO, and the DLO were struggling. Our subcontractors, our specialist subcontractors were struggling too. So what we did also, we supplemented the response with the Plentific platform. I'm sure many of you would have heard of Plentific, and indeed some of you may be using it. So it's the platform, effectively their marketplace of hundreds of contractors across the country, but actually many in London and the southeast. And it's a, I suppose the best way I'll describe it, it's a morph between Checkers Trade and Uber. So it's got access to these range of contractors who are able to quote for the works and then attend really quickly to carry out the repair. That relationship has certainly helped add capacity to our supply chain response, which is really making the difference in terms of us being able to meet that ongoing demand that exists. And then the other challenges that they will apply to us all. We'll pick out vulnerability, and vulnerability has been really important. I remember in the AI model, I was able to show you one of the examples about the vulnerability of residents. It's, again, I think in the early days, we had a one size fits all. We didn't take enough consideration of vulnerability of residents and how we needed to adapt the service. We are doing much more of that now, and indeed that's an area that the Ombudsman has flagged too. In terms of scrutiny and increased standards, of course, the response to the tragic Rochdale case and Awarp's law that with the detail to emerge shortly, we've got consultation on the new Decent Home Standard. We've got new consumer standards where there's no doubt that damp and mould will feature very highly in future scrutiny and standards. We also have, as L&Q, a P49 investigation going on by the Ombudsman, and it's important to call that out. So the Ombudsman has been working their way through the large HAs just to understand how large HAs, doing some others, so Clarion were before us, Birmingham was HAs and local authorities. Birmingham had a P49 reviewed by the Ombudsman. Ours is ongoing, and some of the things that the Ombudsman has identified, things like complaints handling, speed of repairs, because they actually look back over the last 18 months, 2 years, about how cases have been handled. And certainly for us, during that period of our supply chain capacity, we do have cases where they took too long to repair, but now with Plentific, we've addressed that. But of course, we don't stand still. We are still doing much, much more too. There's lots of things that we continue to do as we continue to improve the service. Like all of you on the call, I would hope, you would have reviewed your offer, the services against the October 21 Spotlight report and then the follow-up report in February. We did. We had our transformation team of carried out a gap analysis on anything that existed, both in 21 and since. We decided originally not to produce a new damp and mould separate policy. We've reversed that decision and we've now produced a bespoke damp and mould policy. It's not just a footnote in some of the other policies. We have a dedicated damp and mould policy. Again, we think that's the right thing to do. And it was interesting, wasn't it, just a few weeks ago, where the Ombudsman was quite critical of landlords that so few had developed a bespoke damp and mould policy. We have done that, and we're happy to share that if people find that useful. Vicky, who's on the call, Vicky Holland, my head of sustainability and special projects, who's our damp and mould expert, has an internal damp and mould working group that cuts across L&Q with all of the key stakeholders. So again, we keep it fresh, we keep it dynamic, we understand how we're doing, we think about new initiatives, we think about things we need to do better. Really, really helpful. We keep that going, as well as, of course, engagement across the sector, Future Homes Consortium, G15 engagement, etc. All of the things that you would expect is all going on rightly as we need to continue with this evolution of response. We've also been doing some work on upskilling our technical team. So I'm pleased to say that one of the country's leading authorities on building pathology, Mike Perret, building pathologists, Professor Mike Perret. I know Mike very well. He used to work for me actually some 25 years ago. It's not that long, is it? Yeah, that might be that. No, maybe 20 years ago, back in Lewisham when I was working for Lewisham. He's gone on to achieve great things. And he's now a professor of building pathology and an expert in damp and mould. On the right there, that's his book, which is a brilliant read. Our surveyors, some 60 surveyors, have all been through 2-day training for damp and mould, but also what Mike has done is kind of looked at the tools that we were using, that most people are using, protein meters, humidity meters and sensors, but actually said you need to go further. So boroughs, endoscopes, calcium carbide testing, all of those things that take our analysis, take our diagnosis to the next level. Because actually we know that in many instances that outside of our response through ZAP carbon, if a surveyor attends a property, that there is a risk of misdiagnosis. So we've helped the team through making sure they've got the tools to deliver the job. And finally, this is my final slide because I do want to leave a good amount of time for questions. We have an ongoing program of stock condition surveys. I've created an in-house to a hybrid approach, an in-house team and an external consultancy that do our stock condition surveys, 20% on a rolling program. So our data is never more than 5 years old. They carry out their HHSRS surveys. So since this figure is since the summer of 21, 75 Cat 1s and 411 Cat 2 hazards. And again, I know some of you have been asking about our Cat 1 and Cat 2 failures. They captured in stock condition surveys, and of course our Cat 1s are effectively dealt with immediately. We also then have a whole house approach to investing in our stock. So we've procured new major works investment partners that will deliver our investment program over the next 15 years, circa £3 billion over the next 15 years. We procured 10 partners to deliver that. And this is the full range of investment from, of course, decent homes work, energy works with significant bid through social housing decarb to investing, improving the energy efficiency of our stock, our fire safety remediation program, etc. Everything excluding repairs delivered through this program. We currently have a 1-year program, but because our data and our stock is improving. We do intend to move to a 5-year program, but the input to the program will be the data we've got from the sensors that I refer to, the AI information around predicting likelihood of damp and mould, but of course our stock condition data too, and then meeting our responsibilities in terms of sustainability and so forth. Right, so I think that absolutely is, I know that is the last slide, so I'm very happy to take any questions. Thank you very much. And I'm going to stop sharing.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thanks. That was really great. Thank you, David. I'll go straight to questions because we've got some hands up. So Keith Kerman.
Thanks, Joanne. Dave, great to see you. Fantastic
Keith, how you
presentation.
doing? So Keith is from Southwark. You're still there, aren't you?
I'm still here. Yep, 20 years in.
Wow. A great
Well
place,
done.
I must say, and a great place.
Trying to keep up to the standards you set, David, when you was here.
Good to hear.
Excellent presentation. Really, really interesting stuff. I've got a couple of questions. We're actually having discussions at Carbon now to come in and do a piece of work for us. So just wondering, how does it go when there is an actual building defect? And what have you found in terms of risk of misdiagnosis? Because obviously they're not actual surveyors. And that was an issue that was laboured in the Housing Ombudsman report in terms of that misdiagnosis when there's an actual underlying issue that's causing the dampness. And do they pick up on and list category 1 and category 2s under the HHSOS?
Yeah, good. All good questions, Keith, as ever. Right, let's deal with them in reverse order. So no, they don't. So the Cat 1s and Cat 2s are dealt with by our stock condition surveyors, both internally and externally. On the surveying point, you're right, they're not surveyors, although they are very experienced in assessing what's driving damp and mould. So they do flag that, and of course, if they aren't clear, they flag that in their report, and then we will send a surveyor. So in the Healthy Homes team, we've got surveyors there, but across property services, we've got 60 surveyors. So that's one of the reasons that Mike Perrette did the training, so that our surveyors are able to follow up and respond to damp and mould, and also the cases that go directly to them. So not surveyors, they do, you know, just sort of been out with them. They do diagnose, but of course, if something is more complex, then there is a referral process that our surveyors look at it. What was there a third point there, Keith? Just remind me, did that cover it?
No, that covered it. Thanks very much, Dave.
Oh, great. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Keith.
But let me, if you're really thinking about using them, do speak to me. Do speak to Vicky. Vicky knows that very well. And if you need if you've got any queries or questions or need any advice, then I'm happy to speak to you offline.
Okay, thanks. Jane, and could you say where you're from as well? That'd be really helpful.
Hi, David. Amazing work going on by L&Q. I used to work for L&Q a long time ago.
Okay.
So I can see that
But you might know Vicky because Vicky's been there for double-figure years.
All right. I think mine might even be before that. Sorry, I come from Kingston Council. I'm head of landlord services, and like every other council and housing association, we're noticing a real spike in reports of damp, mould and condensation, but coming through as part of a formal disrepair claim. And we've got a particular estate that we have got some large capital funding for, that's regeneration, but a regeneration timeline over the next 5 to 10 years. So eventually all existing customers will be offered a brand new home on the estate. But in the meanwhile, they continue to live in tower blocks, deck access flats that are in a poor condition anyway. Which is the reason why we got the grant funding for the regen. I just wondered, in terms of kind of the L&Q's much more comprehensive approach, is have you got a similar issue on a regeneration estate, and do you just carry on with the normal actions, the normal investment in terms of repairs, maintenance, upgrading to the property, even though there is an end date to the useful life of this property that is perhaps 5 or 10 years away?
I think the simple answer is yes, because if we expect residents to live there, I mean, I'll say this because it's well documented that you will know that Clarion had an estate in Merton that was going to be demolished, and they took the view. And I can say this because I also used to work for Clarion. It's one of the HAs I used to work for, but they took the view that actually they would not carry out the works, various works, and the discussion was going on when I was there, in fact, various works because of the whole estate was due to be demolished. And it then created a great deal of difficulty because hundreds of residents were living in those conditions. So we take the view, we take a really clear view that actually, even if we've got an estate, it's getting that balance, isn't it? You don't do, huge major upgrades unless there's a health and safety issue we need to do and make sure the property remains warm, dry, and safe. So we continue with that principle, very much so. So in fact, ombudsman, regulator, and others, and indeed our board, have that very clear view that even if a property is going to be regenerated, it still needs to be habitable, and it still needs to be the type of property that one would be happy to live in. So yes, we continue that approach.
Okay, Jane. Clive Green.
Good afternoon and good to see you, Joanne. Thank you. Really good presentation indeed, I must say. Just a couple of things. I suppose it's a bit more of a statement rather than a question, but more your opinion than anything. Because we're using a similar thing to the Zap Carbon. We're using it. It currently has a name, IoT Solutions, here in Sutton Housing Partnership, where I'm working. And by the way, I didn't say, Sutton Housing Partnership People in Place Lead or Assistant Director, Head of Service, whatever it may be. It's what I think I suppose I wanted to say is the reality is, and the input that we're all putting into this is, we need to identify an appropriate resource wherever that may be to manage it, and that's reality. Not trying to do it on the looking at your costs on the cheap. Clearly not. There's a serious amount of investment that's gone into that. We've all had these problems for many years wherever we may have worked, and I suppose now it's coming a little bit to book that we need to address it. I really think that's that carbon, and if there's anything else that you can find that gives you that intuitive look within a property while you're not there, that's the key to it. We've all had hundreds of thousands of surveyors go out. It's the same old stories, countless times. I've been to the property so many times. This stuff really works. I've also had it rolled out on a trial in our older person's housing to monitor their behaviours. So kettles going on over, and a lot of those companies that do that type of thing offer this option around picking up condensation when the heat and cold in rooms. So I think it's really useful if we can get, if anyone can get an opportunity to get that either as a trial or to implement, they should look at that. And there was something else I was going to say that I wanted your opinion on, and it's completely gone because it was slightly off piece from this, but it was in a similar sort of vein. But I suppose it was around, I suppose it was a recommendation that a lot of the capital programs are going to be severely affected by this, I suppose, in terms of the structural works and things like the roofs that was it. The roofing, you mentioned roofing and electrical. That was that seems very strange because that's not what we're getting. We're getting some roofing stuff, but around the electrical, we're not really getting that. We're tending more to get literally structural walls, cold and warm, and not being used adequately or in the right ways and that type of thing. We're getting it in a different way. So it would be really interesting to find out what type of extractor fans you're using. Not asking you to tell us that now, but maybe outside of this, I'll get in touch, because we need to make sure we're using the right extractors. If they're not working properly, that could be an ongoing thing that we could have been doing for years in decent homes programs and the like, so we need to pick up on that. But as I say, to summarize, the Zap Carbon unit, we use a different one, but I think that really is the way forward. That really is the way forward. Thank you.
Clive, lots of statements there, all of which I agree with. I mean, the most significant thing I think that we have from the Zap Carbon relationship, the two things really, it's the speed of response, but most significantly, it's the time taken to spend with residents to take them through what's driving the problem, what they can do to mitigate the problem, and then a clear pathway to resolve it. I mean, I've been out many times inspecting properties myself, and then being out with my surveying team in loads of different organisations, and I would challenge a scenario where any surveyor was in a property for an hour and a half, 2 hours, giving residents advice on how they can mitigate damp and mould, and it was done in such a respectful way that, back to what I was saying, this idea about it being a partnership. Actually, we've got responsibilities to deal with the underlying problem, such as it may exist, but also the resident has a role to play. And the fact that so many of our residents are actually embracing that. It's not done in a patronising way. It's done in a way that is about improving their living conditions, and the fact that they respond quickly, they clean and shield, we then organise the repairs, they understand what to do with heating, with extractor fans. I mean, one of the properties we went into, the resident had disconnected both of their extractor fans, had turned off the combi boiler, and had an electric heater in the living room to heat the flat. And just simply, nobody spoken to him about it. He was concerned about energy costs, but actually that was the least efficient way to heat property. Nobody spoke to him about it. And the fact that a Zach Carbon visit was able to do that, deal with the extractor fan, give some advice on the heating. There was an issue with downpipe outside. They flagged that. We went and addressed it. Fantastic. That's the kind of response that we love to see.
I think getting that insight into being able to, to contact someone and say, actually, you know what, we've noticed your property is really cold at the moment in these areas. Is there something going on? And then they knowing that helps to bring that all together. So as I say, and there are, I wouldn't say there's a number of, but there are 1 or 2 trial companies out there. So if it's funding that people are worried about, then you may be able to get it. We've got ours on a trial, you see, with IoT Solutions, yeah, it's definitely helping us, getting a bit of a head start to be able to.
How many visits have they done? Have they been out to lots of properties?
So it's done in a slightly different way, and we're a lot smaller than Quadrant, obviously. So we've got 50 units at the moment in one area. We've got 100 covering another piece of work, but both can do the same thing. It's a small, unobtrusive unit. It doesn't film anything, so we just got to get people to convince them to that it's not, it's not watching them, sort of thing. And it just shows you those heat levels, and we get those alerts on the database, so it tells us in that way. So owing to it being a trial, we've got, I'm not quite sure, but we've got just over 100 plus damp and mold cases currently. So at least we can deploy those to 50 or less, because we may use more in different rooms, and that's the work that we're looking at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Clive. Really good stuff. As I said, if you need any help or advice, sharing more details, more than happy to do so.
Thank you. Caleb.
Hi, how you doing? I'm Caleb from Westminster Council. Before I ask my questions, that was an awesome presentation, so thank you very much for taking the time. I've got 2 questions before I forget both of them. The first one is to do with the humidity sensors that you've installed across properties, because we're doing the same over here. The first question was about targeting. So are you just targeting properties that have reported damp and mould? Because that's what we've started doing, but I've also targeted properties that we've resolved damp and mould issues in, installed a variety of ventilation units, and I'm kind of trying to compare the effectiveness of the different units. So I was just wondering about your targeting, and also in terms of residents refusing the sensors, is there anything that you've done to kind of incentivize them to accept it, or have they come back with issues in the future because you haven't been able to monitor through the sensors? And actually I have 3 questions, sorry to bombard you, and the third one was around your leaseholder cases and how you deal with them compared to residents. Thank you.
Okay, so to leaseholders, clearly it's not the same offer in dwelling, and we don't offer the opportunity to pay for the service. That's a slightly different offer. I mean, clearly we give advice if there's a leak or so forth, but the relationship is a different one. So we don't offer in the same way, and we won't do a detailed inspection to their property unless it's impacting, say, in a flat, or conversion, other properties. So it is a different offer, but that's the nature of the contractual relationship. Refusals is an interesting one, because I would estimate that, although Vicky may well correct me if I've got this wrong, I think a lot of our refusals were in the much earlier stages as opposed to more recently. We've still got a level, but more in the earlier stages, people more suspicious about it. The way that we've been responding to it has been a great deal of publicity about what we're doing. It goes out in our resident magazine called Home Life. We talk about our response to damp and mould. We talk about zap carbon. We talk about the benefits of humidity sensors. So we hope through sharing the success of having the sensors with the resident population, once those that don't have it fitted see, for instance, it start to come back, we have another opportunity to visit and deal with it. And obviously we try to use the opportunity to fit the sensor the second time around if there is a recall. So yes, we do quite a lot, but in the end, if residents don't want it, then we're not forcing the issue. But we just hope through gentle persuasion it will do the trick. In terms of targeting, the targeting is through properties that report. What we will do, however, is as part of the AI, so identifying properties that are not experiencing it yet, once we do the works, then that will be an opportunity to fit the sensor. But the minute the driver is those that report, and then we resolve the issue and fit the sensor with the residence agreement. We're not doing other properties that are not experiencing it. But I don't know, Vicky, is there anything you want to add on that? Have I said anything that's wrong there?
No, not yet. I'm making notes just so that I'm ready to answer. But no, that is, we do target on a reactive basis more than a proactive at the moment. So it is where they are reporting it to us. We have seen, though, just on the leaseholder, we have seen more leaseholders calling and reporting. And we are then, as David said, giving that more advice rather than doing the visits through Zap Carbon.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Lots of hands have went up after your questions, Caleb. So you started something there.
We'll take Gareth.
Hi, I'm Gareth Westfield. I'm the head of dish repair at Haringey Council. But I wasn't there when David was there. I used to work at L&Q as well when it was merging with East Thames a few years ago. So,
oh, really?
Okay. Yeah, I do know a little bit about the structure there. My question's around the AI data and where that comes from. Is it strictly just the sensors, or does it look at previous repairs data, tenant data, vulnerabilities, over-occupation, things like that? I'm sorry if I missed it during the presentation, but does it feed in lots of different data sets, for example?
Right, you froze then, so I didn't hear the question, but I'll pass it to Vicky.
Thank you.
I'm sure she can do it. Sorry,
that
you
was
literally
a nice
froze
one.
then, so I didn't hear you.
And so, yes, it does. It looks at a number of variables, Gareth. We've got it from our housing management system. So it will take into account the vulnerabilities, the number of repairs that have been raised against those properties. There is a checklist in the presentation. You may have missed it, but that's kind of what gives us the information as we go through. And I think it was around things around leak issues, number of people in the property, and then also where that property is situated, whether it's ground floor or top floor. So it does look at a number of different variables, not just the sensor information that we get through the humidity sensors.
That's great. And is it kind of a dashboard that it feeds back into centrally, or does that beep at them? Or
Yeah, so I have regular meetings with our data science team, and I don't know if you have a data science team, but they are they're very enthusiastic. And I had just yesterday, and they have now put it into a dashboard for us. So it allows us to go in and use different parts of that information and tailor it to the work that we are doing. So it's being developed as we speak, and so they're doing more and more with it at the moment. So it's in its infancy, really. We've only really been doing it for the last year. But we're finding more and more information from it, and we are able to use it in the day-to-day operational team. So I also manage disrepair, and my disrepair manager is quite excited about the information we're getting from the AI model as well.
That's great, thank you.
Right. I'm going to ask the final question.
Mine's this is intermittently freezing for me, but I've tried to shut things down, so hopefully it'll be okay.
Okay, if it's okay, I'm going to have the final word question for David and Vicky. So as you've highlighted, it's a partnership approach in the experience that you've had on your Healthy Homes programme, and it's about how people and buildings come together, how we live in buildings. What would you say for those of us who aren't as far advanced on the journey to dealing with this agenda, about how we can develop culture change and the skills of all of the staff working in the housing organisation? What advice would you give us who maybe aren't as far ahead as you?
Okay, so I think data is really important to understand what is going on in terms of what's coming into the organisation. It's really key that we have at various stages struggled with that, but we're far better now. But certainly in the early days, just understanding where it is, who's doing what, really problematic. Once we introduced Add Carbon and then gradually signposted most of the activity through Zap Carbon, that really has made the difference. That gives us a real understanding about what's happening and where. I think the work that we've done on training and awareness, so staff, not just those staff that are in the repair service or in the Healthy Homes service, but actually some of the things that I referred to, the contact centre. Our contact centre is the main signpost, the main gateway for the service through phone and increasingly email and online, but nevertheless, it still mostly comes through that. Through our neighbourhood housing leads, or as most others would call them, housing officers. We've gone back to a traditional approach with housing officers, really small patches, residents, housing officers or neighbourhood housing leads that know their residents. So actually they know what to look for and what to do. And some of the things aren't costly, are they? Just an understanding of damp and mould, and even at a basic level, what to look for and what to do when you spot it. Even just that entry level things have been so important in terms of understanding their response. And then I made an assumption in the presentation that most of us, if not all of us, would have done the review against the Ombudsman Spotlight report in 21 and the follow-up in 23. Really key, because again, we found that really helpful. The Ombudsman contacted us last year for an update. Hey guys, what have you done? It was really good that we give a really strong response to it. And then what we've since gone on to do is develop our own damp and mould policy. So I think it's a connection of all of those things, Joanne. I don't know, Vicky, what anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say on the training and awareness there, Joanne, as well, you know, we have just restructured our housing management team, and we're over 100 staff in that area that are out with our residents. But we also experience this stuff ourselves in our own homes. And what I found when we were doing some of that awareness training, we had Zap Carbon come in and do that, is that they were finding that tips and advice really useful for themselves as well. And then what that allowed them to do is share that with their residents each time. So we've done it with all of our housing leads, but we've also done awareness training with our tenancy sustainment team as well, and also some of our direct labour staff. We're doing talk. So it's just about raising that awareness with all of them, and that some of this is day-to-day advice that everybody could use, as well as there might be other, you know, we do need to do our repairs and stuff, but just the awareness of some of the tips and advice that we can do on a day-to-day basis really does help, because everyone's kind of talking the same message.
Okay, that's brilliant and perfect timing. Thanks so much both, and it's great that you're in so many of our boroughs, reassuring, and I'm sure we can learn from local visits. So thanks everyone for joining. The slides and further information will come round. Rob will make sure that comes around to everyone that joined. So thank you very much, and see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.